Sense About Science, we are an independent campaigning charity, and we aim to combat the misrepresentation of science and evidence in everyday life. And we do that in a number of different ways. We do kind of short-term responsive work where we kind of correct media inaccuracies of the science. And we also do longer projects where we produce guides aimed at the public, which are about addressing the gaps between the public understanding of an issue and when the scientific evidence, the body of evidence in the scientific world is very different. So, for example, we've done guides on climate change and the difference between weather and climate change. We've done them on GM, we've done them on uncertainty, we've done them on making sense of chemical scare stories. They're called our Making Sense Of guides. And we also do campaigns, and that's what I really want to talk about is two of the campaigns that we've run. One of them actually started right here in 2012. It's Plant Science Panel. So this started back when Rothamsted Research announced that they were going to be doing field trial on a genetically modified wheat. The aim of this particular wheat was to try and reduce the amount of insecticide that was used. And they were contacted by a group called Take the Flower Back, who said that they didn't agree with GM and they were going to come along and rip up that field trial. And so we worked really closely with Rothamsted on a campaign called Don't Destroy Research. So we took, on the one hand, the anti-group saying that they didn't agree with GM, they didn't think it was safe, they didn't believe it was safe. And we turned that around to something much more broader, much more kind of positive, which was about Don't Destroy Research. And in a matter of days, we had thousands of people signing a petition saying just that they didn't want this research to be destroyed. They wanted to support the researchers. And as part of that petition, we asked people to leave comments and questions. And this is where it got really interesting. Because the people that were leaving these comments were from all across society. There were bakers, barmen, air traffic controllers, and lots of them left questions and comments. Things like, I'm not sure about GM, but I would like the scientists to be able to do the research to find out. Or even, I'm not really that keen on GM, but we don't know until we find out, so let's see what happens. And they also left a lot of questions. And what we did with those questions was we put them directly to the researchers who were carrying out the field trial. Very busy, stressed researchers who thought their field trial was going to get ripped up. They took the time out of that to then answer these real public questions. Okay? These questions were not always straightforward. They often had lots of assumptions tied up in them. They were often rude. And what they did was they took the time to unpick what the questions really were, to put the answers in context, and to really help those people with those questions to get a good human language answer. And we saw, as a result of that, a real shift in the kind of discussion about this particular issue. A lot of the media coverage was about the fact that people were saying, don't destroy research. And then on the day of the planned protest, there was a huge turnout in support of the researchers. Many people from the local community came along to support the researchers, which is really down to the work that Rothamsted does with their public outreach. So it's so worthwhile doing that sort of thing. What we did find is that answering these questions was a really useful resource for others as well. So we took all those questions, we took all those answers, we published them online so that anyone could see them. And actually loads of people going to it. We had thousands of people hitting our website. And so we decided to do this properly, we decided to do it on a bigger scale, and we launched something called our Plant Science Panel. So what started off as, I think, 2 or 3 researchers at Rothamsted answering a handful of questions has kind of snowballed into about 17 different organisations from right across the UK, putting forward researchers, independent researchers, to answer any and all questions about anything to do with plant science or agriculture. I think there might be a question at that. And that panel's been running for just under 5 years, and that's answered over 500 questions. All of them are available online. You can go through and look at anything. You can search for terms if you're interested in particular issues, like you may have read an article about neonicotinoids. What are those? Well, let's have a look up on the Plant Science Panel. If you've got further questions, then you can answer those as well. And our role in that is helping those researchers answer those questions. Because sometimes when I get a question in, and I send it on to a researcher and say, hi, and I'm not going to use any names here, can I have 80 words to try and answer this question? And I get 800 words back. There's a bit of effort there to try and break that down, to put it in that nice, open, human language. What we've also found really important is that just the fact that they are putting themselves forward and saying, you can ask us any questions, is so valuable. Just saying, we are open, come and ask us questions. And Rothamsted, at the actual time of the trial, went even further than that. They invited people, including the protesters, to come round and look at the labs, to show them what's going on, to show them what they're trying to achieve. And one thing that really still kind of tugs on my heartstrings, and the videos on our Facebook page, is the researchers themselves putting out a public appeal to the protesters, live on video, saying, you know, we are environmentalists. This is why we are trying to do this. And that really made a difference. They were really not, you know, PR savvy researchers here. They're really awkward video, actually. But it's just so heartfelt and human as a result of that. So it's just so worthwhile. It's what we call our public-led, expert-fed approach, which is a slightly ominous thing. But it's basically about answering real public questions. So it's not about getting a group of academics together to think up what the questions are that people want answers to and publishing them on a FAQ part of the website or at the back of a press release. It's about getting real public questions, because often that takes you down different paths that you didn't expect. So the other campaign I want to talk about is our Ask for Evidence campaign, and I think some of you are wearing our Ask for Evidence badges. There are more of them outside by the coffee. Again, like all our work at Sense About Science, this starts with the public. So the panel work starts with public questions. Ask for Evidence starts with people asking for evidence. And that's really simple. That's what the campaign is about. It's about encouraging anyone to ask for evidence behind a claim that they come across. And what we've seen so far since we've been running this campaign is the more people ask for evidence, the more people expect to be asked for evidence. And that's a really powerful change. And that's what this campaign is trying to do. It's trying to introduce a real behaviour change here and raise the level of expectation when it comes to evidence, both from, you know, the general public in terms of what they understand about evidence, but also those making claims and what they know that they need to provide in order to have those claims carry some weight with the wider public. So what sort of claims am I talking about? Well, it's really anything. And that's the beauty of the campaign, because it really starts with what people care about. If you're into running and you see claims about you should be running barefoot, or in these particular trainers which are more akin to running in barefoot, what's the evidence behind that? Well, go out and ask the companies that are making those products. Say to them, I'm really interested in this, I'm a keen runner, I've only been running in my £10, you know, trainers that I got from Decathlon. What can I do to, you know, what's the evidence behind these products that you're trying to sell? And then you start a conversation and you say, look, evidence matters to me. And just people knowing that makes a big difference. And of course, it's not just about advertising claims, it's also about policy as well. So whether it's a policy that says third runway at Heathrow is going to boost the economy by X billion pounds, or whether it's a, you know, a new strategy on social care is going to, you know, improve the quality of life of X number of people, we expect those claims to be based on evidence. And sadly, they're not always based on evidence. So what we can do is hold those people to account who are making those claims and say, evidence matters, show us your evidence. And you can all do it online. So when you get on the tube, you can take your phone out, you can take a picture of the advert, you can go on the website, upload that photo and send it off to the company or the politician, the MP, the candidate, and say, I've spotted this, really like to see some evidence on this, can you send it over? And that's all public on the website. So you can go along and see the thousands of things that people have asked for evidence about, which is a really interesting insight into the behaviour of people and kind of the sceptical community as part. And then you can upload the response you get as well. So you can have a little scroll through there and see the good responses, and you can see the bad responses. And then what we do as part of the kind of strategy of the campaign is we write those up as stories. We get people who've asked for evidence to write their own stories about how they went about asking for evidence and whether they were happy with the response or not. So I'm going to run through some of the stories. Katie went to Vision Express. She was told that if she didn't have the latest lenses, her eyesight would continue to deteriorate. She wasn't sure about this. She went and asked Vision Express HQ, and they said, you should never have been given that advice, okay? We have a responsibility to you to be up to date with the latest clinical evidence. What's happened is wrong. We're going to launch an investigation, and we're going to make sure that staff training happens, not just in that branch, but across the whole of the company in the UK, so that advice is never given again. So that's one person asking for evidence, and a whole company changing the way they do things, which is really powerful, and that's a positive story. Network Rail was another good example. They announced they were going to do a pilot. They were going to pilot blue lights in stations throughout the UK because they thought that it would reduce the number of suicides at train stations. Someone asked them for evidence about this, And that what Rail were great. They said, actually, the evidence is really patchy. The science just isn't there yet. The evidence that is available, we're not sure whether they've counted suicides during the day as well as during the night, when presumably blue lights in stations aren't going to have as much of an influence. But, and they turned it around on us, they said, how can you work with us and help us make sure that we run this trial in as good a way as possible, so that in 5 years' time, if every station in the UK has blue lights and someone asks us for evidence, we can say, we have this trial, this is really good, rigorous evidence to support why we've done it. And ultimately, it's a low-cost solution that potentially might save lives. So we're looking into it and seeing whether that trial's going to work. One more example, scooter racing crackdown. So the Met Police came out with a bunch of adverts around England saying how they cracked down on different aspects in the city. And one of them was cracking down on scooter racing in Hornsey. And they said, as a result of increased police numbers, the number of scooter racing in Hornsey, which I assume must have been a big problem, has dramatically reduced. Someone asked them for evidence about it, and they said, well, we haven't really done any kind of collection of data, but it's the observation of one individual officer. That doesn't constitute good evidence. And suddenly we're having a conversation with big organisations about what constitutes good evidence and what doesn't. The person who's asking that question in the first place is suddenly part of that conversation about what is good evidence and what isn't. So it's a really positive discussion, improving the way we're talking about evidence, both in terms of the people who are asking, but in terms of the people who are being asked as well. And the latest thing we're going to be doing is encouraging people to ask their local election candidates for evidence as well. And we know that when we run an event and we get people to tell their MPs that they're coming to an event, those MPs are desperate to come to that event and meet their constituents because it really matters. It doesn't take many people asking for evidence to really make a response. And if you get 5 or 10 emails into an MP's inbox, that can really change what they're doing. And we had a great example of this from 2015. Someone asked for evidence from Julian Huppert, who said that if more people cycled to work, the NHS would save, I think it was £21 billion. It sounds like a huge amount of money. They asked them for evidence, and Julian said, actually, it's based on this science paper in the Lancet. Here's the evidence. He then admitted to us that actually he hadn't read the whole science paper. He'd only read the abstract and saw that it was published in the Lancet, which is a respected academic journal. So he went back and double-checked his figures. Okay, it turned out that there was a model. It had assumptions, and there were caveats, of course, as everything to do with science has. But ultimately, he had solid evidence for it, and because he was asked, he went back and double-checked it. Okay, it didn't help him in the 2015 election. Maybe this time, when people ask him for evidence, he'll get elected again. I don't know. So ultimately, I guess take-home messages, both from the plant science panel and from the Ask for Evidence campaign, is that you have to be responsive and you have to really be open and human in the way you're talking about things. Whether it's a field trial, whether it's with protesters, whether it's a company talking to your customer, whether it's a politician talking to a potential voter. As citizens, we have a right to ask for evidence and expect there to be evidence in return. But we're not going to get that unless we ask for it. And as I said right at the start, the more people ask for evidence, the more people expect to be asked, and that's a really powerful change. Thanks very much.